Okay, thank you for your presentation, Ameera. I think in the time allotted, you were able to give us a holistic picture of your dissertation and the areas that you focused on with specific regard to this issue of child sexual abuse. Let me now just go into some of the observations and questions raised by the examiners, and maybe you can answer them, and then we will move on to the questions from the audience. To begin with, the criteria for the selection of your texts. You have 9 works, okay, and they are all focusing on the theme of child sexual abuse. But what is the actual criterion? Like, for example, if I were to ask why these works, why not some other works that focus on the same kind of topic? Because you have works that cut across time periods and regions. There are other texts also like that. Connected to that, maybe one more question. That is with regard to your choosing of letters and diaries of Virginia Woolf. Okay, again, what is the role of personalized forms of writing like these in the midst of the other works that you have chosen? And again, why Virginia Woolf and why not someone else? Mainly because I think somewhere in your dissertation itself, you have pointed out that you have made a random selection of works to illustrate the the issue of child abuse and the problems that these children face. That random is quite problematic. I think you need to explain why you have chosen certain works while leaving out others.
Okay. In the early stage of the research, actually my intention was to study the impacts of child abuse in general, adding the works like Sound and Fury, Wuthering Heights, Sons and Lovers, etc. But on further reading, I thought to focus on the impacts of child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse itself is a taboo subject even now. Literary works on that theme were comparatively a few in number. There were novels like Princess by Jean Sasson, including the scenes in which a child is subjected to forced sex, but such scenes were not the part of main narrative. My focus was on the short-term and long-term impacts of child sexual abuse, not on mere abusive episodes. So only those works dealing extensively with the consequences of child sexual abuse could have been included in the study. And after the year 2000, more novels like The Treatment by Mo Haider and Living Dead Girl by Elizabeth Scott and Perfect Match by Jodi Picoult came out. Though these works were focusing on the theme of pedophilia, they were written mainly as crime thrillers. Trauma of the abuse victims were not addressed explicitly in such works. That is why those works were excluded from my study. And regarding the inclusion of works in my study, the after effects of child sexual abuse were clearly observable in the selected characters. And they were validating my hypothesis regarding child sexual abuse, trauma, and recovery. And regarding the second question, I think you asked the second question on Virginia, inclusion of Virginia Woolf. Actually, in the title of thesis, it has been given as based on selected literary works instead of limiting it as fiction. Autobiographical essays, diaries, and letters are of course considered as part of literary non-fiction. So technically, it was easy to include in my work. Virginia Woolf is such a familiar writer to all literature lovers, cutting across all the limitations set by region and time. She herself had admitted that she was a victim of child sexual abuse. She wrote that she had heard Freud's theory that reports of sexual abuses were mere fantasies originated from the daughter's incestuous wishes. she revealed that this theory of Freud had made negative impacts on her. And her autobiographical essay, A Sketch of the Past, details the causes for her depression. And her letters and diaries underline her pain from sexual abuse in childhood. Moreover, there is a false notion that child sexual abuse usually happens in the lower class families, but actually it is the best kept secret among upper class too. Even Freud suppressed his theory of hysteria because he did not want to slander the upper class men. So I wanted to include Virginia Woolf too in my study, as she belonged to an elite intellectual aristocratic family. And the reason for the inclusion of her work is that incestuous narratives were usually dealing with abuse by fathers. Even a monumental work on child sexual abuse, Kiss Daddy Goodnight by Armstrong, which galvanized feminists of the time to organize child sexual abuse, contained personal narratives on abuse by father. But abuse by brothers is equally traumatic, but it is often belittled as mere sexual experimentation among children. Works dealing with abuse by brothers were very few in number, so I thought of adding Virginia Woolf. She was victim of sibling abuse, and it has caused much damage to her, as she herself revealed.